Hello and welcome to Tech TV. Today we've got a special program on AI and some of the recent news out of Silicon Valley. My name is Bill Mew, and I'm joining you here from the studios in the UK, and I'm joined by my colleague, Pete Warren. Pete, tell us a little bit about what's happening with the recent acquisition that Nvidia have made and what it really means.
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? There we were. Everybody was getting ready for Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, and very, very quietly, Nvidia announced that it was going to take an interest, is probably one of the best ways of saying this, in a company called Groq. Now, it's very, very important that we remember the Q in this. It's Groq as opposed to the search engine Grok. Now, Nvidia has bought this for 20 billion. Oh, sorry, it hasn't bought it. It hasn't bought it. It's very, very important to say it has not bought it. It's investing $20 billion in a relationship with Groq. Now, one of the things that it's interested in apparently is inference. So, Bill, tell us about inference. What is Nvidia's interest in Groq?
Obviously, there's been a lot of interest in AI recently, and people are investing in enormous amounts in data centers and GPUs. And in the GPU arena, really, Nvidia have been the market leader by some significant margin, although they don't have the market entirely to themselves. It has allowed them to become the most valuable company in the world with trillions of dollars in market capitalization. But they need to be looking ahead because there's a concern that there's a bubble, and we need to look at, well, what is going to sustain this massive valuation they have? And there is a critical difference here in AI between what you do to train the AI, which is like having a race car and putting it in the wind tunnel and focusing on its aerodynamics and tuning it and get the suspension right, with actually running it remotely for clients where they need to get the value from it, which is inference. Because first of all, you train these AI models and then you need to run them. The inference, watch the instructions that you're making from them. And one of the things that's absolutely critical to the performance of inference is really high-speed memory, hopefully on-chip if you can get it as close in order to maximize the speed and minimize any latency. And the investment that Nvidia are making here is in precisely that. It's the high-speed memory. And people envisage that we're going to be moving away from separate GPUs and CPUs to integrated AI chips that have everything on them. And hopefully this will be both the CPU and the GPU and the NPU if you've got a processing logic to do for neuralistic programming. But also you need to have the high-speed memory on the chip in order to drive it as possible. So in the racing car analogy, this is the fuel injection that you're actually going to drive you around the track and go as fast as possible. So that's the acquisition that Nvidia are making, which is going to be an investment that they feel will position them well for the future, the move away from purely being a GPU-oriented outfit to actually having more of the essential ingredients for an AI chip.
Well, I think, though, there is something very, very important that we have to stress, Bill, and you need your knuckles wrapped quite considerably. GPU. What is GPU? What is CPU? You're using
my apologies for using wantonly a series of three-letter acronyms. The CPU is the computer processing unit. This is like the traditional brain that operates most of the software within a computer. The GPU is is the graphical processing unit, and that's the thing that actually works out some of the graphical thinking that drives computer games, that does a lot of the magic that here we're doing in a studio to provide you with video. But also it's been found that it is the best way to actually crunch a lot of the data for a lot of the AI training that you need to do. But obviously, if we're taking the focus away from training and onto inference, suddenly really high-speed memory comes to the fore.
Okay, an inference. A lot of people are going to be puzzled by a lot of these technology terms. Inference, a lot of people would assume that basically means that the system is actually trying to come up with an answer quicker on the basis of training. Is that right?
It's using the training which has created the model and the logic that underpins the AI model, but actually it needs to implement your question as quickly as possible, and that will involve writing a lot of information immediately to memory and then bringing it back again in order to process it fast. And that's why some really high-speed memory becomes really, really important in this particular aspect. Now, there is also an aspect to this acquisition that is worrying some people, and that is the fact that, as you alluded earlier, they haven't actually acquired the company. They've done something that we've seen a few times recently, which is an acquihire, where actually instead of paying top dollar for the entire company and all its assets, which would trigger clauses within a lot of the employees' contracts where they might have stock options and might be hoping to make a real killing from any investment in shares that they have or in options. They've got around that, and also importantly around a lot of regulatory scrutiny by investing in the company, and their investment has actually particularly benefited them by allowing them to potentially poach, is a bit of a tainted word, but they're taking a lot of the talent and they're licensing the technology and they're compensating some of the early stage investors. But potentially the people losing out here are the employees. Many of the employees who joined this and any other startup for potentially lower wages than they could get elsewhere, in the expectation that they would get a big win and a big payday when the company is either acquired or floats. But under this acquihire model, it's not going to float. There's no change of ownership that would trigger the clause within their options. And there's no ownership change that would allow the regulator to step in and potentially interfere.
So essentially, we've got an independent company that one other company has put a lot of money into, but it hasn't bought it out. I mean, we started to see the genesis of this, didn't we, with DeepMind, because Google bought DeepMind, and DeepMind's head is now the head of Google. They were after the talent within DeepMind, and this is an extension of that, isn't it?
It is, and it's becoming more common, particularly recently with a series of these acquihires. Now, we've got our man in Silicon Valley who we'll probably bring in here for comment. We'd like to welcome James Delli Santi. Now, James, thank you for joining us. You're our man on the spot out there in the US with your ear to the ground. We'd be very interested to hear from you exactly what the perception is of this acquihire trend and what the potential implications are for Silicon Valley, the overall culture there.
Well, thank you for having me and being able to speak on TechTV-Live regarding this really interesting deal. I think from our perspective, it's a little bit different than the framing of this conversation in that Nvidia's licensing of Groq's assets really looks like a Christmas gift to the Groq company, its employees, and its shareholders. in this deal, if you read between the lines and how each of the shareholders are being compensated, everyone gets a lot of cash very quickly. The interesting part about this deal in the context of AI is that in Silicon Valley here, we know that the path from LLMs to AGI is quite uncertain at this point. There's a lot of controversy that LLMs alone, which are probabilistic technology, won't get us to AGI. So the other forms of AI, which are starting to come into people's awareness, are from the prior AI bubbles. But the machine learning alone isn't enough because you're training your models. You also need knowledge representation, you need inferencing, and you need reasoning. And what's so interesting about this deal is that it is the first stake in the ground. It's verifiable data to say that LLMs alone are not the starting point to get you to the promised land of what AI's potential is. You need inferencing. And why is that? Because the patterns that the machines learn are not being processed fast enough. The GPU alone is not enough to accelerate LLMs. When it comes to answering questions and delivering specific answers fast, you have to be able to recognize patterns within the data that's been learned. And that's the rationale for the LPU by Groq. So it's Nvidia acknowledging that more technologies need to be evolved in order to move AI collectively forward, which is to move from learning to providing answers. And inferencing is a key core tech in AI to get that to happen. Now, what's interesting about the deal is that for antitrust reasons, like you're saying, how do you move the state of the art forward, but solve for the complexity of Groq, which is a 10-year-old company with a lot of money invested that built a different kind of business, which is hosting and acceleration on inferencing. How could they get that technology or get access to the LPU technology and reward the employees and the shareholders who have stayed with the company for 10 years? And what's really interesting about this deal, from my perspective, at least here in Silicon Valley, is it's actually elevates the bar in Silicon Valley for what an acquisition could look like. And that's because of how the CEO of Groq and the board chose to compensate themselves, their investors, and the employees. So, for example, if you understand the nature of the deal, most employees that work at a startup, they have a cliff up front when they join a company, and you have to wait a year before you can vest your shares. So, for the most recent employees at Groq who joined within the last year, that cliff is being waived so that all of their shares vest, which means they will receive cash, an accelerated cash amount for the most recent employees, so they win. For the employees that have been there for quite some time, 85% of their shares will receive the distribution. It'll be paid up front for their vested shares, and a 10% is paid mid-year and the remainder at the end of 2026. So in effect, they are having their vested shares paid at the $20 billion valuation within a year, which is an extraordinarily short time for a startup and its employees to receive the earnout associated with the acquisition. So those employees are winning who have been there, who have both vested and unvested shares. And about 90% of the Groq employees are going to be joining Nvidia, and they'll be paid cash upfront for all their vested shares. And the remaining shares will be paid out at the $20 billion valuation over time, according to a vesting schedule for Nvidia stock. So it's really
So
fascinating.
what you're saying, Jim, what you're saying is that actually this isn't such a bad deal. What you're saying is that, in a sense, this possibly redefines the models for how the companies will operate in these startup environments.
Yeah, to me, it absolutely represents a new, completely distinct way to operate when you've been working very hard for 10 years on a technology as the market comes to you. It is absolutely a new bar in how employees are being treated during this holiday season. And it's no surprise that they announced it during the holiday season because I believe everyone is winning. In typical acqui-hires, they will acquire the employees in an attempt to steal the assets by stealing the know-how and the IP of the employees. Here, what's so interesting is Nvidia saying we're going to license your technology on a non-exclusive basis. So the current shareholders can still license the technology for their data center and for other players who want. And it's saying that Nvidia is confident enough in their ability to monetize this technology, they don't have to put any constraints on the technology they're licensing.
But this isn't the case with all acqui-hires. What we saw recently there was Alphabet's attempt to buy Windsurf, which actually fell apart. And immediately after that, a predatory organization came in and stole some of the key staff. And a lot of the employees that weren't seen as valuable were left with very little indeed. And therefore, while at least with the traditional IPO model where you've got options and vesting and everything like that, you know where you stand. With a lot of the acqui-hires, or if this becomes a real trend, then there's very little certainty. And there may have been a level of generosity to the Groq employees, which we applaud, but there's no guarantees here.
Yeah, I think it really reflects, and I'll use this metaphor, it feels like every CEO and board group and the founder group has a choice of how they want to treat the separate employee stock option pool upon a change of ownership. And I look at it that it's as clear as day. Some people are Ebenezer Scrooge before his transition, the miserly Ebenezer Scrooge, to use a Dickens reference, and other CEOs set this up with generosity like Ebenezer Scrooge after he became the generous person. And the reason why the acqui-hires happen in the former case is because they don't have I believe, an attitude of the generosity, which is how do we take care of our employees during the change. The investors have been in this a long time, and they clearly, from the choices made and the way I interpret this deal, they are clearly making it possible for the employees who want to move to Nvidia. They get their payouts according to if it was being acquired. And at the same time, the shareholders who want to stay in Groq's current business, which is the data centers, they can continue running the business as the CFO takes over the CEO job. But I have been part of acquisitions and been part of acqui-hires where the intent is, in fact, to not pay the employees. And you can see that pretty clearly. But since the data on the compensation is so public, they are taking it public in this way, making the information and the compensation public because it's a good deal for everyone. In those acqui-hires you're describing, they will be private deals, and the only way you can find out about the employees not getting their fair share for the long time they worked is you have to talk to them personally. It's a private deal and it'll be held private.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to that towards the end of this relationship and how those relationships develop in that rather Dickensian way that you're talking about. But I mean, let's just look at, for the time being, LLMs, right? Large language models. Just to wrap everybody around the knuckles because they keep on using these three-letter acronyms. What we're talking about here is this is $20 billion being used to actually get people their answers quicker. What we're saying is that people don't want this latency. And what we're saying too is that, in a sense, we're also developing this anthropomorphic bond that people have been talking about, because we want to give you the answer quicker. We want to actually make it look like it's much more of a human relationship with the AI. That's what this $20 billion is being paid for, isn't it?
Yeah, and what's so interesting is $20 billion has a lot of commas associated with it. And you can imagine the value that Nvidia places on being able to get those answers faster by paying $20 billion, which even in the most conservative valuation must mean that they think it's worth $100 billion or more, because they're paying 20 billion, which means they're gonna pay that money. They got to make it back. And
And
so,
one of the other things about this, Jim, is, you mentioned data centers. Well, there's been lots and lots of concern about energy usage, about
yeah,
water usage for cooling. If you can make these systems more efficient, then of course you're going to lower those costs, aren't you? You could
yeah,
also lower the
and
needs for these big data center models as well.
yeah, that's a great point, Peter. And what it's showing, and we talk about this often, is that if you need 4 billion or 8 billion parameters, something inherently is inefficient about the idea of modeling the output of thinking, because we're modeling all the language processing coming out of all the thinking, which is the all the content that exists out there on the internet. But that's the output of thinking. And so we're modeling that with what can arguably be an inefficient method, which is driving the need for power, driving the need for large data centers. And what you can see is while they move the state of the art forward, where artificial and intelligence continue to evolve, they're actually saying we need to make data centers more efficient. How do we do that? We make the AI more efficient, and DeepSeek is the perfect example. Better algorithms, better chips, cheaper inferencing, less learning, and more thinking. So we're moving from learning. Well, you don't want to always keep learning. You have to start logic and reasoning from that learning. And what's also missing from the equation ultimately is knowledge that you already have. So
And
in
that's
some
that's
cases,
That's one of the fascinating things about this, because so many people are thinking, "Oh, AI, the model of it is all sorted out already. That's what we're going to move towards. We're going to move towards these great big data centers. We're going to need this investment in all of these data centers." Nobody's thinking about the speed of evolution that is occurring. I mean, is this a move towards an artificial intelligence chip? An what should we call it? An AIU.
yeah. Well, one could hope. There's arguments on both sides of getting to artificial intelligence, but the notion of reasoning and thinking, as a human brain thinks, it stores knowledge in frames, so that and an example, Fifi Lay, and who's basically the mother of image processing today. In most cases, when they're learning, the AI can get confused between a man on a horse and a statue of a man on the horse in Trafalgar Square. But human beings can tell instantly that those are two separate things. And a 1 year old who's a toddler can tell the difference between a live bunny rabbit and a toy bunny rabbit. They know that instantly. And AI is still confused by that. So we are at the beginning of, although we're trained on all the knowledge, and Apple had a great paper on this, The Illusion of Thinking. In fact, we're at the beginning of real thinking. Now, you can rationale and use probabilities to arrive at the right answer, but when the AI can't tell the difference between, like, husband and ex-husband, because probabilistically those are very similar in the way they occur within language, those those are completely different distinctions. And if you can't tell the difference between Mustang a car and Mustang a horse, then you're confusing the domains. And to some extent, that's where these hallucinations come from, and that's where some of the creativity comes from. But in the end, we're moving forward to thinking. So what we have to do is train on all the content and then start working on how human beings use knowledge and logic to reason based upon the frames of content that they know.
And there's
And
another point here as well, isn't there, Jim? Which is we actually don't want a lot of data to keep on moving around. We don't necessarily want data to go to these data centers. If we are going to think about this, we want to keep data as close as possible, because a lot of people don't actually understand that it costs money to move data around. They don't think about the mechanics involved in all of this. And so what we actually do want is at some point to have an artificial intelligence chip. We want to have a lot of the operations done locally, don't we?
yes, I believe that that's a good point. Um, you want, and not only do you want it to not be moving around, you don't want the meaning of the data to be moving around. So, for example, since LLMs are based on probabilistic learning, deterministic learning is like the definition in science, like 2 plus 2 equals 4, or H2O is a water molecule. You don't want to learn that H2O is a water molecule. You have to know that it's a molecule, and you never want the data behind the definition of H2O to change. You want to make sure that that kind of knowledge, which is actual knowledge. It's not learning what an H2O model is. It's knowing what an H2 model is. You don't want that to shift, right? Because all of our science, math and science and chemistry and biology, there are certain laws in the universe, physical laws, biological rules, and the science behind it that you don't want the AI to learn incorrectly or guess at the answer. And even in our data, for example, in data security or identity, you don't want to be 80% confident that it's someone's American Express card. If you're looking for an Express card number, you want to be 100%. So you have to verify the data. And in the last conference that just happened this fall, a big discussion was around the concept of knowledge graphs and bringing knowledge and knowledge graphs into the AI alchemy, if you will. And so Google, as you know, built the world's largest knowledge graph. So they're sitting on quite an amazing asset. And then now you're seeing this notion of moving toward recognizing smaller patterns with language chips in the form of inferencing. So again, we're going back to the basics of the human brain. The brain stores knowledge and it makes inferences from the knowledge that it has.
Let's come up with an analogy for that, because it's a little like, if I walk through a town, I just really need to know where I'm going to.
Yeah.
But what happens with a lot of computer systems is they know everything about the town. They're holding all of that information. They know the room plans of all of the other rooms. There's a lot of information that they don't need. And that's really what we're moving towards, isn't it? To actually
Yeah.
try to find the data that we want, and not actually get all of that data moving at the same time.
Yes, and that's a great metaphor. To move from A to B, you have to know where you are and you have to know where you're going. And then you have to understand the pathways to get there, the potential options, and find the fastest path from A to B, or the most scenic one, or the one that has the most restaurants. And so there's a lot going on in our human brains in terms of framing and referencing. And so that's what's missing from the AI. Just knowing language probabilities is a good way to understand the output of thinking, but it's not the actual thinking.
Well,
We're not modeling the thinking, we're modeling the output of thinking, which is a good start. And we need the inferencing, we need logic, we need the knowledge represented in the computers to take it to the next level that starts to approach how humans actually reason and think. And of course, we learn. And the more we learn, the more knowledge we put into our brains. So we're learning as we go. And we're also learning when we make mistakes. So if you're moving from A to B and you move to a dead end in London, you're going to turn around and go back and retrace your path and then continue to move on. So it's a
Okay,
very good, simple way of understanding
Jim,
where we are.
I think all of this, from the knowledge graphs to the AI chips to all the different dimensions that are going to accelerate and move AI forward, is something that we're going to be exploring in great depth and in great detail in a number of the programs that we have planned. But obviously, the whole hire thing was oriented around some of the talent, and there is a massive a battle for talent at the moment. And interestingly, one of the tactics used to attract talent at the moment has been soup. And I don't know if you saw this, but Mark Zuckerberg has actually used a tactic all his own to seek to approach a number of the key characters that he's targeted for recruitment in the AI space by making his own soup by hand and then hand delivering the soup to some of these candidates. Guys, I don't know. Have you been approached with soup by Mr. Zuckerberg? How would you react if he approached you with some of his homemade soup?
Well, that is an interesting, and if you look at it from a different perspective, fairly insightful metaphor to be using in respect to Mark Zuckerberg. God bless his little heart. The sum total of Facebook on the side of what is happening in the way we've reduced critical thinking and how social media has actually reduced the ability for public discourse to be meaningful and to be fact-based has resulted in actually some political views that are causing a rise of soup kitchens in America. And I think that the side of me that is more cynical is that is actually one of the worst metaphors to use to approach people to say, hey, you can use some of my soup and come work for me, given that Facebook has really caused a lot of the political chaos that's in our country at the moment. So as political decisions are being made and as people are unable to afford the basics in our nation, and including food and the subsidies, including the elimination of the SNAP program, which they refuse to fund, it's actually a form of projection, I believe. It seems like a great idea, but in the end, I think analysts are going to tear it apart, given the amount of people who are not in the tech industry that are in soup lines this season. So,
But Pete,
But Jim, it is a bit of a recognition, though, isn't it? Apparently, the talent pool that people are after is microscopic. Apparently, there are only about 1,000 people in Silicon Valley who are top AI caliber people. Those are the ones you're after. So, and I suppose you could say, that soup is a starter. You could say it's an entree. You're saying, hey, this is how I want to begin my relationship with you. I mean, Bill has been thinking that probably the soup of the day at the moment would be turkey soup, as everybody tries to get rid of all of those leftovers. But I mean, this is, you were talking about it being necessary to create these relationships with people, and particularly people who are working in these areas. That's what the soup's intended for, isn't it? It's not a light-hearted soup.
well, there's I wouldn't want to spend too much time thinking about the different ways that this is going to be viewed. But I appreciate the sentiment that by giving you some food, appealing to you to consider talking to us. Yeah, AI talent, and talented AI scientists and algorithmic developers are very few and hard between. They're extremely rare, and I appreciate the sentiment. However, the political overlap of the realities in today's society outside of Silicon Valley, I think it just reflects the bubble nature of Silicon Valley. We still operate in this world where everything is fun and games. And
Well,
it requires us being a lot more responsible about how we treat others and how we treat the effects of AI in society. And certainly it's going to end up filtering down to things as basic as food, shelter, and income.
But Jim, one of the things that we want to do, and we're very keen on doing, is hearing more from you and of you becoming our Silicon Valley correspondent. So, are you saying to me that I'm not going to be welcome on your doorstep with a bowl of Stilton and broccoli soup?
Well, I guess depends on the soup. How good is it?
well,
I'm Italian.
guys,
I'm Italian, so it's good. I have a high bar for how soup is going to be.
Minestrone, Jim. I love minestrone. I'll come around with some minestrone.
well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And maybe offline we can exchange soup recipes. And we look forward to following up this, because as this acquisition and a number of potential other acquisitions unfold as we go into the new year, I think there's going to be plenty of fodder for us to discuss here and onwards. I'm going to have to rush now because somebody's at the door. It might be Zuckerberg delivering soup or something. So I'm going to have to leave you here. Guys, thank you for your contributions in 2025, and we look forward to a great year ahead and discussing some of these stories and how they unfold as we move ahead.
Yeah, and we can compare soups. Hopefully all of us will get a small pint.
Exactly.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.